Hello, everybody. Jason up, New Days Revolution Cave. Welcome to the Friday episode of the channel. Whatever, I don't know. Whatever that means. I think we're gonna dive right in, folks. If you tuned in yesterday, if you saw the quick 8-minute, 10-minute video introducing the return of the 80s in review. I started it about 3 or 4 years ago with a fellow named Avi Klein, and continued it on my own, and then dropped it because that's just what I do. That's just the way my brain works. It just drops things. Well, we're gonna pick it back up. What are we picking up? We're gonna pick up taking a look at what was going on in the world of television, in the world of movies, in the world of pop culture, in the world of toys, in the world of wrestling, per year of the greatest decade of all time. So we will go year by year, 1980 all the way to 1989, and talk about some of the stuff that happened that influenced our lives. Will I continue it on into the 90s? Possibly. The early 90s, possibly, maybe, right? I would only take it to about 1994 when I graduated high school. After that, didn't care. Maybe. If I really want to keep the content going, maybe. But we will start with 1980. Now, I have said this before. To me, the 80s didn't begin until 1984. As strange as that may sound, but I do not have any pop culture memories of 1980, 1981, 1982, 1983. I was too young. My brain really wasn't retaining much, but my 80s kick in 1984. So to me, 1980 is still kind of the 70s. We had not quite gotten out of that 70s fashion, 70s music, just that whole 70s disco vibe. I feel like 1980 was like 1979 part 2, right? But 1980, as far as box office goes, folks, let's talk about the movies. That's right, the movies released in 1980, obviously, there's a ton of them. But some of the ones that stood out to me, The Shining was released in 1980. Very classic horror movie, right? Can we call it a horror movie? I suppose it's got a bit of a supernatural feel to it, but the Shining is more like a psychological thriller, I suppose. Shining, of course, Jack Nicholson doing what Jack Nicholson does. I don't know. Is it one of his better performances? I don't know. I'm not the biggest Jack Nicholson fan. But The Shining is still a movie that I enjoy watching. I think it's got just a very cool feel to it. When you watch the movie, you feel the isolation, right? When you watch The Shining and they are the only 3 people in a giant hotel for an entire winter, you can actually feel the isolation. Especially when like Doc is talking to the family before he wraps it up for the year and leaves, and he's showing them around, he's showing them the kitchen, and there's just nobody else there. I can feel the isolation. I like it. I like The Shining. I like it. I won't watch it all the time, but if I watch it every couple of years, I like it. I like The Shining. Empire Strikes Back, of course, is the second movie in the Star Wars franchise. Obviously, I was a bit of a Star Wars kid, Star Wars fan growing up as a kid. Not an over-the-top Star Wars fan by any means, but I knew of it. I think the world forced me to care a little bit about the Star Wars. I had the Star Wars bed sheets. I'm sure I had a poster at some point. Maybe a toy here or there, but never really collected the figures, and truly never enjoyed the movies until just a few years ago. And I know that's bizarre, but I was not a Star Wars movie fan at all. In fact, if you go back in the channel archives, there is an episode where I talk about, Star Wars has hit our family and we are huge fans. I didn't even know how Return of the Jedi ended ever until I was 40. I mean, I might have, it might have been talked about at some point and my brain heard it, but didn't retain it. I had no idea I had no idea that Darth Vader turned good at the end of Jedi. No clue as an adult. Just didn't care. Then we got into it and we just said, our whole family said, let's just do it and watch it. And this is when you could buy box sets still in stores. And I remember buying the 6-disc 4K maybe, or just Blu-ray of Star Wars. And when I started watching the newer movies, I instantly had negative feelings towards them and was partial to the first 3 or 4, 5, and 6, whatever, the ones we grew up with. But since then, I've rewatched the newer ones a few times, and I love them. I love them just as much. I truly love the entire franchise, and I know that's not a blowaway statement. We're talking about Star Wars here, so it's not a shock. But I actually really, really enjoy the Star Wars franchise, and we are again planning to rewatch it as a family, and then include some of the Disney Plus TV shows as well. Some of the we've seen The Mandalorian and we've seen Boba Fett. There's a few more that we're gonna also watch. So Airplane and Caddyshack, 2 big comedies of the 1980s. Now this might get multiple thumbs down from the viewers. I don't like either movie. I don't care about either movie. I know that some people from our era, and I think not our era because we were 4 in 1980, but I think like our dads probably have said that Caddyshack is the funniest movie of all time. I don't think so at all. I don't think Caddyshack is that funny at all. I think people get caught up in, Caddyshack's the best movie of all time. It's hilarious. All right. It's okay. Caddyshack and Airplane. Airplane, again, was supposed to be this hilarious, slapsticky, Naked Gun type of movie, but prior to Naked Gun, obviously. Okay, sure, it's silly humor and it's fart jokes and all right, sure, it's fine. I could watch it and never care if I saw it again. Feel the same way about Caddyshack. Superman 2 came out in 1980. I really want to go back and review the Superman movies again. I have not seen them since childhood. I have not seen any of the Superman movies since Superman 4 came out. And I would very much like to go back and see if I care about Superman. I'd like to. Friday the 13th, folks, was released in 1980. I need not say any more about that. Popeye was released, and I think that's kind of on my I want to check it out list. Robin Williams, Shelley Long. No. Shelley Duvall. Shelley Long. Is it Shelley Duvall, right? Shelley Duvall. Who's Shelley Long? Oh, Shelley Long's from Cheers. Okay, right. And whoever played Bluto. I'd like to see it just to say I watched it. So that might be a movie that I seek out on the streaming sites and try to catch Popeye. My Bodyguard came out in 1980, and I remember really liking that movie as a kid because it was always on TBS. And in fact, I own it. It was a Kino, what is it? Kino Lorber release when anybody cared about Blu-ray releases. I have My Bodyguard in the collection, and I like it. I like that one, and that also reminds me of 3 O'Clock High, which was not 1980, but still similar movies. The horror movie world, of course, saw Friday the 13th, Motel Hell, Maniac, which I believe is a Friday the 13th-esque slasher movie. A movie called Death Ship, which sounded fun. New Year's Evil. And Prom Night, which I just watched on VHS about 6 months ago and loved. Loved Prom Night. Jamie Lee Curtis. To me, never looking as good as people think she does. Wasn't a fan, not a fan. But I have put a star, an asterisk, if you will, next to New Year's Evil. It is on Pluto, and I will be watching it this weekend. I'm going to check out New Year's Evil, and that's going to be something I do with this show. Maybe definitely a new movie. Probably not a new TV show, because I've got way too many TV shows to watch, but I will find movies from the movie portion of 1980s in review, and I will watch them. So I'm watching Popeye, and I'm watching New Year's Evil as soon as possible. Maybe even starting tonight, just so that we can talk about those 2 new movies. And if I like them, I'm going to certainly seek them out on physical media and add them to my collection. Television shows, Magnum P.I. debuted in 1980. I have watched that set through, and it's great. I enjoyed Magnum P.I. a lot. All of the episodes kept me interested and involved. The show morphed a little bit from the early season 1, throughout. It got better, I think. Magnum, the first season was pretty much focused on Magnum being this super chick magnet kind of guy, and every woman that he was working with on a case he would end up, getting with. But that quickly changed, and it just became Magnum P.I. Good show. Bosom Buddies, which I do own, but I have not seen since it originally aired, or was in repeats. I certainly didn't see it in 1980. I remember it being on my Fox affiliate, either in the morning or late at night. I can't remember which. I've seen a few episodes. I don't know if I'm going to enjoy watching the DVD set. I might have to force it down. I don't remember much about it. Tom Hanks, Peter Scolari. I know the concept. I don't remember liking it. Too Close for Comfort was another one of those TV shows that was always on TBS. 4 o'clock after school, part of a block of shows. Too Close for Comfort was, all I know about it was Jim J. Bullock was, what was his name in that? Man, I can just hear Monroe. So Too Close for Comfort, I don't have a lot of, I just know it was always on. And I'm sure I sat around and watched an episode when it was on. A show called That's Incredible started in 1980. That's Incredible was a nighttime, kind of like a, not like an America's Got Talent, but like, here's some shocking stories from around the nation. This person can balance on their head for 45 minutes. Let's bring them out and have them do it. That kind of thing. Stories, kind of like a Ripley's Believe It or Not show, which aired at some point in the 80s. That's Incredible, I think, had Kathy Lee Crosby as a host, and I want to say John Davidson, but I don't think that's true. It might be true. I don't know. But, I remember that being on as a kid a lot. That's Incredible. You could put, a guy could put a nail through his nose. Then they would have stories. I remember the story about a haunted Toys R Us in California was on That's Incredible. So it was a show like that, big, exciting, rare feats of whatever or stories. That's Incredible. David Letterman debuted. He had been a special guest host on Johnny Carson's show for a little while before getting his own show in 1980. And I think that David Letterman is probably one of the top 5 comedians of all time, just based on delivery. Him and Norm Macdonald and what's his name? Man, brain is not working. He's dead. Had the slick back hair, old guy, hunched over, always wore black. What's his name? You know who he is. But the delivery of jokes, the Norm Macdonald and David Letterman, I love so much, just based on how they present comedy. Love it. I love David Letterman. Along the same line, cartoons that debuted in 1980, Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, obviously a spin-off of the Happy Days television show. So Fonz and the Happy Days Gang. Strawberry Shortcake debuted in 1980, which surprised me. I didn't know that Strawberry Shortcake existed that early in the 80s. I would have guessed 1983 or 84. I don't know if the toys came out right away in 1980 or if those waited a year or so, 81 maybe. But Strawberry Shortcake, the cartoon. Heathcliff debuted in 1980. Now, I looked this one up. This one ran from 80 to 84. So that is not the Heathcliff that we watched after school, I don't think. Unless they re-aired the Heathcliff that we watched after school, because Heathcliff was on during the after-school cartoon lineup. You know the song, Heathcliff, Heathcliff, no one should, blah, 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 the neighborhood. I don't know if that's the 1980 to 84 version. I'm not sure. Did Heathcliff have a remake in 86? Or did they just take the 80 to 84 set and put it out in 86, which they could have done. I mean, Scooby-Doo was a very old cartoon that they replayed in the 80s for us, so maybe. Also, Richie Rich. I did not think that Richie Rich came out that early in the 80s, but Richie Rich debuted in 1980, and they immediately teamed Richie Rich up with Scooby-Doo, and they had their own show. Richie Rich and Scooby was the name. Who Shot JR was probably the biggest moment in 1980 television. From the TV show Dallas, one of my favorites, if not my favorite TV show. Who Shot JR was one of the biggest things that, one of the biggest pop culture television events that absolutely shook a nation. It was a cliffhanger, which is what they used to have on television shows, where the season would end with something hugely dramatic, and then you wouldn't know what happened until you tuned in next season, which was usually several months, 8 months later or so, when they start up again in September. They took a summer break. I'm sorry. Shows went from September, summer, hiatus in summer, reruns, September, the new season begins. So you had to wait three or 4 months or so. But when it ended with when JR was shot. JR was shot in the final episode of the 1980 season or 1979 season, and nobody knew who did it. And everybody was speculating, and everybody was going nuts. Magazines and newspapers and stories and who shot JR. And this is pre-internet, folks, so we don't know. You didn't know. And the producers kept it quiet, and nothing was leaked, and you didn't know who shot JR until the very first episode of the next season. In fact, when I watch my DVD set, there's bonus features. There's a bonus feature, little short movie presentation about the Who Shot JR phenomenon. And they actually filmed everybody shooting JR so that nothing could get out. That if it got out, we wouldn't know who did it, because they filmed everyone shooting JR. his brother, his mother, his father, everybody shot JR. And so they had 12 people shooting JR. So you wouldn't know who did it. It was awesome. It was so fun to see because they showed that footage. They showed Bobby sneaking up on him and shooting him. Great stuff. They showed his mother shooting him. It was fantastic. All right, stuff around the world in 1980. Something so famous, we've heard it so many times. Do you believe in miracles? Yes. That's right. Do you believe in miracles? Yes. The U.S. hockey team upsets the USSR in the Olympics. The Miracle on Ice, it was called, probably because one of the best lines in sports commentary history. Do you believe in miracles? Yes. As the time of the game runs out, I believe it's Al Michaels with the famous line, do you believe in miracles? And the game is over. Great line that we have heard over and over and over again since 1980 on all kinds of sports highlights, commercials, everything. We've heard that line. In May, Mount St. Helen in Washington erupted, killing 57 people. That's right. 57 people lavaed to death by Mount St. Helen. Not in some bizarre foreign land, but no, in Washington. Mount St. Helen erupts. Pac-Man, in lighter news, Pac-Man is released in Japan. The highest earning arcade game of all time, Pac-Man, is released in Japan in 1980. And I think that he was called Puckman in Japan, I believe. CNN, Constant News Network, was debuted in June of 1980. CNN. I don't believe at the time that it was 24/7. I don't believe. I could be wrong. Now CNN, I think, has live news to some degree 24/7. I haven't watched it. I don't know. But I think back in 1980, CNN was at least partial day news and then maybe, I don't know, infomercials or something. But CNN changed the news game forever, really. No more news at 6 and 11. No more newspaper only. Now we have CNN. Obviously, that spawned multiple 24-hour news networks that dominate our televisions today. There was work was being done on something called Empire, which would eventually become the World Wide Web. So way back in 1980, the concept of the internet was being worked on, and it was called Empire. The Philadelphia Phillies beat the Kansas City Royals in the World Series 4-1. Ronald Reagan becomes president, defeating Jimmy Carter, who recently died at 384 years old. Actor Steve McQueen dies at age 50 after going into cardiac arrest during a surgery to remove tumors from his neck. My only familiarity with Steve McQueen is a movie called The Towering Inferno, which was a television movie, a great made-for-TV movie about a massive skyscraper that is supposed to be disaster-proof, but then catches on fire. And he was in that. I don't know. I know he had cancer, and I assume that these neck tumor removal surgeries was supposed to be routine until he died on the table. Also dead in 1980, John Lennon. John Lennon shot, assassinated, if you will, by some unwell human being. John Lennon, dead in December of 1980. Popular music of the year 1980, Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd, Rock With You by Michael Jackson, and CDs start to appear in stores. Blows my mind, folks. I had no idea that the CD made its debut in 1980. Now, I'm sure that it didn't make its universal debut or flooded the market by any means, because we still have to get to 8-tracks. We still have to get to cassette tapes. But it looks like the CD, in some form or another, presented itself for the first time in 1980. The WWF, folks, the World Wrestling Federation, has not yet gained the national notoriety that it enjoyed in 1984 and 1985. But our WWF World Heavyweight Champion is Bob Backlund, who won the title in 1979, and he carried it until 1983. Pat Patterson begins the year as Intercontinental Champion. He drops it to Ken Patera, who then dropped it to Pedro Morales, all within the same 12 months of 1980. We see the television debut of Hulk Hogan as a bad guy managed by Mr. Fuji. That's not true. He's managed by Classy Freddie Blassie. Tito Santana and Ivan Putski start the year as WWF Tag Team Champions. Tito Santana and Ivan Putski. They drop the belts to the Samoans. At the big event in Shea Stadium, Bob Backlund and Pedro Morales win the tag team titles from the Samoans, but are forced to relinquish them because they are both title holders in the WWF. Bob Backlund is the world's champion. Pedro Morales is the Intercontinental Champion. They cannot hold the tag team titles. They have to relinquish them. And the Samoans win the titles back in a tournament. Now, I don't know how legit the tournament was. I don't think it was legit at all. They could certainly get away with things like that back then, because the Samoans defeated Tony Gurria and Rene Goulet on a televised match to regain the tag team titles. My guess, without going back and doing a ton of research, is that there was one match for the tag team titles, the Samoans versus Tony Gurria and Rene Goulet, and all the other matches were just made up. We had no way of proving them wrong. If we tuned into TV in 1980 and watched WWF, and Vince McMahon said, well, last week in Toledo, Ohio, the tournament got started, and we're down to the Samoans and Tony Gurria and Rene Goulet, we would have no idea whether or not that was true. Only the folks in Toledo, Ohio would go, was there a show here? I don't think there was a show here. But then it would die there. Nothing would get spread. There would be no Reddit stories about it. The Samoans eventually dropped the titles to Rick Martel and Tony Gurria in November of 1980. And one of the bigger events wrestling-wise in the WWF was Larry Zbyszko turning on Bruno Sammartino, with their feud culminating at the Shea Stadium show. This was a very early bad guy swerve kind of deal that we're so used to today. Bruno was training Larry Zbyszko, and Larry Zbyszko wanted to prove his independence. He wanted to prove what he'd learned, so he challenged Bruno to a match. Bruno didn't want to do it, but eventually accepted. They had a scientific match on TV until Bruno was out wrestling him. Larry Zbyszko got mad, smashed Bruno with a chair, and as a kid in 1984, that was on the Coliseum Home Video Best of WWF Volume 1 that I watched a million times. And at the end of the clip, they would just show Bruno laying on the mat with literally a pool of blood underneath his head. And that was so visually iconic for an 8-year-old to see that puddle of blood. And even the match in Shea Stadium was crazy because Bruno was blading his arm. And so Bruno has a gushing arm because it was a cage match, and Larry Zbyszko threw him into the cage, and he ran into the cage with his arm, and so Bruno's cutting up his own arm, and that was visually iconic as well. So there you go, folks. There's the 1980 year in review. Now, obviously, things will pick up as we get into the years that we are more connected to. I'll be able to talk about more toys as toys will have specific release years. 1980 was not a huge toy year. We had things like the glowworm, I think, but we'll get more into toys as the years go on. So there you go, 1980 in review. Tonight I'll be watching either New Year. Now I'm going to watch New Year's Evil, and then I'm going to look for Popeye, and I'll get back to you when we talk about 1981. How did I enjoy Popeye? How did I enjoy New Year's Evil? We'll see you next time. Good night now.